Hello, and welcome back to Baby Steps to the Moon, the series in which I borrow heavy inspiration from the US Apollo program to get my own little green men to the moon in the real solar system. Here we're watching my Apollo 6 head for low Earth orbit. This, in fact, will be the same launch vehicle that will eventually take my Kerbals to the moon. What you see here is the full stack, launched in full for the first time. Beneath those fairings at the top are my command module and lunar module, safely ensconced for the bumpy ride to space. Hopefully my mission will go much more smoothly than the real Apollo 6. It was the last unmanned mission in the Apollo program and was intended to test, among other things, the translunar capabilities of the S-4B stage. That's the third stage of the rocket. The idea was to launch the CSM, that command module, into orbit, along with a dummy lunar module, called the Lunar Module Test Article, of course, boost them both into a translunar trajectory, and then immediately decouple the CSM and have it lower its apogee back down to about 22,000 kilometers. At that point, they'd just do a rerun of Apollo 4, which was boosting the command module up to translunar velocities just before hitting the atmosphere to test the heat shield's behavior during reentry. Sounds all good on paper, but shortly after launch, the Saturn V began experiencing what are called pogo oscillations. These are a very dangerous kind of oscillation caused by fluctuations in engine pressure. You can check it out on Wikipedia for a deeper explanation if you're interested. If these oscillations happen to match the resonant frequency of the rocket, it can rapidly become powerful enough to tear the ship apart. Now, the oscillations experienced by Apollo 6 obviously didn't destroy the rocket, but they did damage it. Two of the engines shut down during the ascent due to ruptured fuel lines, and pieces of the CSM and LM broke off. Mission Control was able to compensate for the missing engines by burning the others longer, but this put the rocket into an orbit that was more elliptical than planned and also used up more fuel. Still, they had enough to go for the translunar injection, so after a couple of orbits to check it out, they gave the go-ahead and fizzle. Found that the S-4B, that third stage, and the one that was supposed to do the translunar burn, it wouldn't restart. So they put into effect a new plan. They separated the CSM and used the service propulsion system to boost the ship's apoapsis to that required 22,000 kilometers. However, in order to do that, they had to burn the engine a lot longer than the specs allowed for, and while it worked, they didn't have the fuel to accelerate the vehicle to the translunar velocities on reentry. So they did manage to salvage some science from the mission, and while they could put a good face on it for the public, internally it was largely considered a failure, which is sad. Fortunately for me, though, KSP doesn't simulate pogo oscillations, so I don't have to worry about those threatening my mission. Although, wouldn't that be a cool mod? One that introduced random mission failures somehow, and you had to try and compensate? I don't know, maybe there's already something like that. But anyway, for me, I just needed to get to orbit. And once we're in orbit, we'll see if I can get my third stage to restart when needed, and the rest ought to be a walk in the park. So let's see how it goes. Alright, I'm going to forego the two victory laps around the Earth. Instead, we're just going to do our burn, to do the translunar burn. And so looking here, you can see that our fuel flow is unstable, thanks to engine igniter mod. And so what we're going to have to do is fire our ullage engines to settle that down. You'll see it's already very stable now. Those little solid rocket boosters basically get you accelerating and push the fuel back down and settle it as if it were under gravity. And so once that's done, we can fire our engine safely, and here we go. We are now in the throes of a very long burn to boost our apoapsis up to about 400,000 kilometers. Now, the moon is not actually going to be there. We're actually in an equatorial orbit right now, but the idea is that if this works here, it'll work when we're actually aiming for the moon, and so that's the point of this test. So we're just going to burn and burn and burn. And eventually we'll burn out and we'll be where we need to be. And there we go. We turned off our engines. And you can see our apoapsis is up there right close to 385,000 kilometers. So we separate our CSM now. We're just going to throw away the lunar module at this point, even though it's the real deal in KSP here. In Apollo 6, it was just a dummy, so they just threw it away. And so it was basically just payload to test that the translunar injection could boost that payload. So we're just going to separate our CSM, get it out of the way so that we can turn around and change our apoapsis to 22,000 instead of 385,000. I'm using MechJeb as my flight computer here. No shame in that, since all the real missions have flight computers to do the maneuvers for them. But yeah, we're just getting ourselves turned around here, and then we will fire those engines and drop our apoapsis back down. From here on out, it's really just Apollo 4 all over again. We're just going to get that apoapsis down and then accelerate to translunar speeds just before we hit atmosphere and test that the heat shield works. There goes that spent stage whizzing past us on its way to a very high orbit. And at this point, that SPS engine doesn't put out a whole lot of thrust, so it's another long burn. But it does the job. This is a slightly different design for my command module than we did before. I spritzed things up a little bit. Decided to use the larger SPS engine because it is pressure fed, so I don't need to worry about ullage on it. Also, it uses the actual fuels that Apollo 6 used for the command module. It's an Aerozine N2O4 mix. Anyway, so there we go. We've got that done. And now it's just a matter of figuring out when to do our acceleration before we re-enter. So here I'm just kind of trying to eyeball it, pick a place that's going to be above the atmosphere and give me enough time to get it done. I'm just checking the time here, so it's about 6.5 hours or so to that point. So once I kind of get an idea of where I want it to be, I'm just going to pull up my flight computer here and have it do a burn that will raise the apoapsis back up to 400,000 or so, that translunar apoapsis again, but keep our periapsis down inside the atmosphere so that it'll actually be a re-entry. I'm going to shoot for about 70 kilometers on the periapsis. It looks like we need to do that at about 6 hours, 20 minutes from now. So we'll just put that in and create that node, make sure it looks good, and once we're happy with it, we'll just go ahead and execute. And at this point, it's just a waiting game, about 6.5 hours until we make that re-entry burn. So we'll sit back and enjoy the view. Alright, and here we are now. Come all the way around. We're about 900 kilometers up and heading in very quickly, getting ready for our burn to raise that apoapsis back up again so we can have sufficient speed for that translunar re-entry. The idea is to get our re-entry speed up to around 11 kilometers per second, and I'll just barely make that. The actual Apollo 6, theirs was closer, well, supposed to be about 11.2 kilometers per second. They only got about 10 point something as a result of running out of fuel. But anyway, here's our burn. We'll let it go for a little while, and hopefully, if all goes well, we shall be at about 11 kilometers per second just before we hit the atmosphere. Alright, about 420 kilometers up, the burn finishes. We turn ourselves around and get ready to separate the actual service module from our command module, which is the part that actually returns, has the heat shield attached. So let's see how this works. Yeah, that was much cleaner than my Apollo 4 attempt. For some reason, the service module got stuck on the heat shield. I don't know what happened there. But anyway, this time it was much better, so that gives me more confidence in this new design. So now we're heading in. It's going to be a long, hot descent. The idea is, just like with the Apollo 4 attempt, we're going to come in, kind of shallow, skip back up a little bit, and then come back down again, slowing down. Hopefully the G's will peak at about 7 point something, which is definitely survivable. Maybe not comfortable. I certainly wouldn't want to sit through it, but it's survivable. So let's speed this up and see how the reentry goes. Alright, at this point we've now hit our periapsis and are starting to come back up. Our speed is such that we've still got about 6 million meters of apoapsis to burn away, but we should take that out handily before we get too much higher. But still, it means that this is a long descent. It's a lot to watch. It's so amazing to me how long it takes to go from the atmosphere down to the ground. It's almost a whole other mission in itself. Now, I could have planned this a lot better. I should have planned for a splashdown, but as it looks, I sure hope we don't land in those mountains, because aside from complicating the recovery of the vehicle, it's a lot harder to slow down when you're losing about 4 kilometers of the altitude you'd hoped to use to slow down. So hopefully we can just fly right over these mountains and come down nicely somewhere a little more friendly. Let's see how it goes. There we're getting hot again. We're beginning to come down in earnest. At this point, our apoapsis is back down to re-entry. We're definitely not going to be coming back into space with this vehicle, but hopefully we'll slow down nice and quick here. Almost there. Chutes are out, and once those deploy here shortly, we will jettison our heat shield, and the rest is just a leisurely float. There goes the parachutes. And next, boom, there goes the heat shield. And the rest of it is just leisurely floating down, down, down until we land. And thankfully, we missed those mountains, so it's actually a more sane altitude that we came down at, and a nice little tip over to finish it all off gracefully, and that's the end. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for Apollo 7, which was the first manned mission of the Apollo program. We'll see you later.